Thank you, Premier, for that very wide-ranging summary of the state of the state, and it's always interesting to look back as well as look forward. We're going to have a little chat now. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Wellington. I'm a partner at PwC. My role for the next 20 minutes or so is to facilitate a discussion with the Premier about the state of the state. There is an opportunity to ask questions from the floor if you would like to. So if you would like to, please raise your hand. Someone will point you out. Please introduce yourself, where you're from, and if you could restrict yourself to one question, that would be much appreciated. I'll get the ball rolling though, Premier. You touched on the Olympics, and you are going to listen to Queenslanders. I can always guarantee you there will be people who'll say to you, why should we be spending significant capital on a 4-week festival of sport? Can you be a little bit more specific about some of the long-term benefits you see for our state?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andrew. And from the outset, can I say that by the end of this year, Cabinet will consider the value assessment. So the South East Queensland of Mayors did a very good study, which now my department is working with the Commonwealth and the councils to look at basically the benefits of if we went down that track of hosting an Olympics. It has changed with the new norm. I mentioned it means that you don't have to build those mega structures that you would have seen in Olympics that have gone past. You can bump in seats and bump out like we did in the Commonwealth Games. But also too, we have over 80% of the facilities that are actually required at the moment because we've actually hosted the most successful Commonwealth Games. When we talk about accelerated infrastructure, there is a great opportunity to bring forward some of the infrastructure that is needed across the entire southeast of the state. So, for example, road connectivity, upgraded rail, and we all know how important the Cross River Rail is, and that is a signature project of my government. So all of these factors need to be taken into account. But we are in a very good place, and the fact that the head of the International Olympic Committee actually invited me to Lausanne and has been out here for the Sports Accord, you could say that Queensland is in the box seat. But all of Queensland needs to share in that, and that is a fundamental principle of my government as we go to look at the value assessment leading up to the end of this year.
Thank you. You've touched on infrastructure. Then, what are your priorities for infrastructure in Queensland, particularly where you might look for federal government support?
Yeah, well, thanks. That's a good question because we'd like to see a bit more cooperation from the federal government when it comes to infrastructure. And of course, our commitment is over $49 billion over 4 years right across Queensland. The Cross River Rail is signature in the southeast, but of course we know the Bruce Highway connects our communities up and down the coast. It's like the spine of Queensland. We need to continually be working on upgrading that. Of course, for exports, our upgrade of the Cairns shipping terminal is absolutely required, especially for the cruise ship liners to come in. And in relation to Townsville, we've got infrastructure happening there at the port. We're upgrading the Mount Isa to Townsville railway line because we believe that we can harness even more resource activity in the Northwest Minerals Province. So it's absolutely vital that that network is connected. We also are seeing a lot of growth in our regional towns and regional centres. And as we see the growth of the southeast of this state, and you only have to drive between here in the Sunshine Coast, here in Toowoomba, or here down to the Gold Coast, to see how so many communities are rising up across the southeast. So in 10 to 15 years' time, I think you will see a greater southeast that is connected, and we need to make sure we're planning for that. And just the other week, for example, Minister Bailey and I actually announced our priority for, they call it the second M1. The amount of traffic that's going down that M1, we're upgrading the M1 at the moment all the way down to the border, but we need to make sure that we are catering for that growth. We're doing the expansion of the Bruce Highway, heading north. We're working with the federal government, but what really annoys me is that we are seeing $7 billion of extra infrastructure money going into New South Wales, $6 billion of extra infrastructure going into Victoria, and Queensland has from the federal government $3 billion over 10 years. And frankly, I don't think that's good enough. I think we need to have a great partnership with the federal government where Queensland gets its fair share. So hopefully we'll have the opportunity. I've penned a letter to the Prime Minister about some key priority infrastructure like I discussed today, and hopefully we will get a response from the Prime Minister in due course. And of course, the Inland Rail is something that the Prime Minister is actively talking to my government about.
So the South East Queensland City deal, that's a deal underway that involves all levels of government. Is that an opportunity to redress this infrastructure funding issue?
Oh, absolutely. I hope it is. The problem is, I know that the Deputy Premier is doing great work leading that SEQ City deal. The problem is we just haven't had movement on it for the last 2 to 3 years. Where we have seen movement in the southern states, we really need to see the Commonwealth come to the party. In the SEQ City deal, it talks about Cross River Rail and the Metro being a priority. Well, the federal government's not putting $1 single into Cross River Rail. We're going that alone. We're putting our money into that to make sure that happens. But also too, when you talk about lifestyle, connectivity, the submarine cable that's going up into the Sunshine Coast for digital access, the city deal is absolutely critical for the way in which we invest into the future. So the sooner we can get the Commonwealth to come to the party with the city deal, and as the Prime Minister has said too, the city deal is also critical if we are to move ahead in relation to an Olympics.
Thank you. So we might change tack slightly. You touched on the drought in your address, and it's obvious that you feel that that's something that's impacted you personally when you see the impact that that's having on Queensland families. The reality is we live in a place where there will be climate cycles. We've had droughts in the past, we'll have them again in the future. And while your government is obviously addressing the drought now, do you think there are some longer term solutions we should be looking at to mitigate the impact of climate cycles in Queensland?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I don't think there would be anyone in this room that doesn't believe that climate change is real and is happening. And Queensland is in its 7th year of drought. And you only have to go out to talk to farmers and graziers on their properties to see the hardship that they're going through. And I do thank many communities have helped with the fundraising in relation to it. Back in over the last 60, 70 years, there have been some 20 dams that have been built across Queensland, and we're very proactive in working with the federal government for Rookwood Weir. We've put $176 million on the table. We would like to see the federal government put their money in. We're almost ready to go with that. We've put money into Fairburn Dam. We've put money into making sure that Emu Swamp. But I am actually monitoring at the moment 14 communities that are so impacted by drought that the towns themselves could run out of water. So I made a commitment to the people of Stanthorpe, for example, that my government would provide the water that they need, and we would not let them run out of water. However, I do think there's an opportunity for governments to look at long-term planning solutions and work together. So, for example, back in the 1930s, a person called Bradfield came up with a plan about diverting some water and making sure that irrigators got more of that access to water. I don't think the scale of that could work today, but perhaps what we do need to do is work with the Bureau of Meteorology, work with the federal government, work with people that can look at these inflows and waterway accesses to make sure there's not going to be any large-term impact on the environment. But perhaps we need to work with the federal government to see if we can do any planning together, for example, when it comes to a smaller version of the Bradfield scheme. So I'm open for that conversation. I've had people talk to me about it in the regions, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with the Prime Minister.
When we talk about climate, it's hard not to talk about climate change, whether it's in a financial, economic or political context. Queensland has a 50% renewables target. How are we tracking against that target?
Yeah, well, I think it's, unfortunately, I think we need to get that message out more to people because we are doing so much in this space. A lot of people say to me that if government gives policy certainty, investment follows. So with our investment in renewable energy, and if we just think about 5% when we came to office, and now we're at 21% next year, that is a deliberate result of policy settings. And we will reach our 50% renewable energy by 2030. I have no doubt about that. We have $5 billion of renewable energy work underway, but we have a further $10 billion on the books. So there is an appetite for investment. And what's great about our investment in renewable energy, especially when we're talking about solar, and a lot of industry is investing in solar themselves to help with power prices as well, that actually sets us up for the future hydrogen industry that I'm absolutely determined that will be equivalent to our next, what the LNG industry was to Queensland a decade ago. Hydrogen is absolutely ours for the taking, and that is a absolutely clean, renewable resource.
We do have a question that's been sent through on the app, and it's you talked about secure jobs in the energy sector, in manufacturing and in hospitality. How will these jobs accommodate the global move towards automation and artificial intelligence, and how do you see your government facilitating people transitioning in those industries?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to acknowledge that there are traditional strengths of the Queensland economy, and we back those traditional strengths of the Queensland economy. That means we back people who work in the resource sector, whether it is in coal, whether it is in gas, whether it is renewable. We back those jobs. What I do see, though, is that there is also new and emerging industries that Queensland needs to be ready to tackle. For example, Boeing has invested in looking at drone facilities in Queensland. AI is another big area, as is blockchain. And we need to make sure that Queensland is ready for that. There is a reason we have coding being taught in primary schools right now. It's not by accident. It's a deliberate policy setting of this government to make sure that our young people are going to get the skills that they need. But what I'm really concerned about is this skills shortage. And I'm quite sure there are many industry people here in this room today that know that Australia has a skills shortage and Queensland has a skills shortage. That's why I want to give people in Year 12, if they want to pursue TAFE, if they choose one of our high priority areas for skills training, we will pay their fees. That's why I want to make sure that we have apprentices being trained in the skills area that we need for the future. That is why we put money deliberately aside so we can train 60,000 young people under the age of 21 so they've got the skills for your businesses. If we don't do this, we will be left behind. And we are leading the nation when it comes to focusing on skills and training. We released our skills strategy before Prime Minister Scott Morrison even mentioned the words at COAG. We are ahead of the game. We are leading the nation. But we all need to be in this together. If we don't get our skills up now for all of the jobs that are needed, we are going to run into trouble. So that is why we are absolutely focused on that and making sure that our young people get a skill and get a job.
Thank you. We might go to the last question. So we now live in a state where we have fixed-term elections, and while that's eliminated a cottage industry in predicting election dates, we do know exactly when the date will be, and I don't know how many people in the room know, but tomorrow it will be exactly 12 months when we have the next state election, 31st of October next year. Fast forward 12 months, what would you like to be saying to the Queensland people? This is what my government has achieved in the last 12 months.
Yeah, thanks. And Queensland's a big state, and there's a lot to do, and there's a lot that we want to make sure that we are telling people over the next 12 months. But I think it comes down to this. Fundamentally, there is dignity in work. No matter what job a person does, it brings themselves dignity and it brings their family dignity. And our job is to make sure that we create an environment in Queensland where people can harness their best potential and make sure that their children have a bright future. That is why I will continue to invest in education, in health, to make sure our families have exactly the health care that they need. And, the delivery of health services to as far away as Torres Strait Islanders living in Mer Island need the exact same access to health services as people living out at Longreach and Winton. We need to make sure that families have secure jobs and that we are making sure that we are preparing the students to make sure that they are ready for the Queensland of tomorrow. And I'm very excited, only a year to go to the next election, but I'm very, very proud of my government's achievements. I'm very proud that we have set a renewable energy target, that we are looking after families across this state, and I believe that we actually care about people as well, and we won't let the vulnerable people in our community down either. And I think that's a hallmark of a Labor government as well, that those people who are doing it tough or who have gone through tough times, we want to make sure that there is housing for them, but also too that they do get the recognition they deserve. And I might just end on this note. I met a man many years ago. His name was Alan Alloway. He used to sit outside a government office, and I said to the officials at the time, "Why is this man sitting outside?" And they said, "Oh, he's just a real pain. He just sits here all the time. We're about to put him down in the register as a serial pest." I said, "Well, what's his issue?" So I took the time to sit down and talk to him, and he'd been abused in an orphanage, horrendously. Every single day he was beaten. Basically, his childhood was taken away from him, and he wanted justice. So he was sitting outside that office, not to be a pest, but to seek justice. And just last week, we passed landmark legislation, which I think every single member of my team is incredibly proud of, where he will be able to be heard. He was heard, and he was listened to, and the abuse that he suffered will be recognised, and he will be allowed to get compensation. That's the sign of a caring government. Thank you.